There are some people in this world who are born with everything. They have money. They have support. They have every door open for them. And then there are people like him, people who have nothing but a dream and the stubborn will to keep that dream alive, even when the whole world tells them to give up. This is the story of a young man who came from nowhere. A young man who had no training, no connections, and no one in his corner. But he had something that money cannot buy. He had a fire inside him, a fire that refused to die no matter how many times life tried to put it out. He grew up in a small town that most people had never heard of, the kind of town where nothing much ever happened. The streets were old, the buildings were tired, and the people who lived there had long stopped believing that anything good could come from a place like this. It was the kind of town that people left. Not the kind of town that people dreamed about. His family was poor. Not the kind of poor where you struggle a little at the end of the month. The kind of poor where you wonder if there will be food on the table tomorrow. His mother worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. She cleaned offices in the morning and worked at a small grocery store in the evening. He watched her come home exhausted every single night. Her hands were rough. Her back was always hurting, but she never complained. She just kept going. His father had passed away when he was only 7 years old. He did not have many memories of him, but there was one thing his father left behind that would change his life forever. It was an old violin. The wood was scratched. The strings were worn. It was not worth much money, but to him, it was the most valuable thing in the world, because it was the only piece of his father he had left. He remembered the night his mother gave it to him. She pulled it out from under her bed. Her eyes were wet with tears. She told him that his father used to play this violin every night before he was born. She said his father always dreamed that one day his son would learn to play it too. He held that violin like it was made of gold. From that moment on, it became a part of him. He did not know how to play. He had no teacher. There was no money for lessons, but none of that mattered to him. He made a silent promise to his father that night. He promised that he would learn, no matter how long it took, no matter how hard it was. And so he began. Every night, after finishing his homework, he would sit on the edge of his small bed and hold the violin. At first, the sounds that came out were terrible. Scratchy. Painful. The kind of sounds that made you want to cover your ears. His neighbors banged on the walls. His mother would gently ask him to keep it down, but he did not stop. He could not stop. He found old videos on the internet. He watched them over and over again on a phone with a cracked screen. He studied how the musicians held the bow. He watched how their fingers moved. He listened to the same pieces hundreds of times until he could hear every single note in his sleep, and then he tried to copy what he saw. It was slow. It was frustrating. There were nights when he wanted to throw the violin against the wall and never touch it again. There were nights when he cried because his fingers hurt and the music still did not sound right. But every time he wanted to quit, he would look at that old violin and think of his father. And he would pick it up again. Months turned into years. And slowly, something began to change. The scratchy sounds became smoother. The painful notes became softer. The music started to sound like actual music. He was learning, not from a fancy school, not from an expensive teacher, but from pure love and determination. By the time he was a teenager, he could play pieces that most beginners could not even dream of. But here is the thing. Nobody knew. He never played for anyone. He was too shy, too scared of what people would think, so he kept his music hidden like a secret. Something that belonged only to him and the memory of his father. When he finished school, there was no question of going to college. There was no money for that. He needed to work. He needed to help his mother. So he got a job at a warehouse on the edge of town. It was hard work. Heavy lifting. Long hours. The kind of work that made your body ache and your mind numb. Every day he woke up before the sun came up. He took a bus to the warehouse. He worked for 10 or 12 hours. And then he came home exhausted. But no matter how tired he was, he never went to sleep without playing his violin. Even if it was just for 15 minutes. Even if his arms were sore and his eyes were barely open. He played. His co-workers at the warehouse found out about his violin one day. Someone saw him carrying the case after his shift. The news spread quickly. And the jokes began. They laughed at him. They made fun of him. A warehouse worker who thinks he is a musician. Who does he think he is? Does he think he is going to be famous one day? They said these things to his face. They said worse things behind his back. Some of them were cruel just for the fun of it. It hurt. He would be lying if he said it did not hurt. But he never let them see that. He just kept his head down and did his work. And at night, when he was alone in his small room, he let the music heal the wounds that their words had caused. Even some people in his own family did not understand. They told him to stop wasting his time. They told him to focus on real work. They told him that people like them do not become musicians. That is for rich people. That is for people who go to fancy schools. That is not for someone from a small town with holes in his shoes. But there was a voice inside him that was louder than all of them. It was the voice of his father. It was the voice of that little boy who made a promise. And that voice kept saying the same thing over and over again. Keep going. Do not stop. One day they will understand. He did not know when that day would come. He did not know if it would ever come. But he knew one thing for certain. He was not playing the violin to prove something to them. He was playing it because it was the only thing that made him feel alive. The only thing that made him feel close to his father. The only thing that made him feel like he was more than just a warehouse worker from a forgotten town. And so he kept playing. Night after night. Year after year. Waiting for a chance that might never come. But refusing to give up until it did. Little did he know that his chance was closer than he thought. And when it finally came, it would change everything. He was 26 years old when he finally made a decision that would change the direction of his life. For years he had been playing in the shadows, hiding his gift, keeping his music locked away in that tiny room where no one could hear it except the walls. But something inside him was growing restless. Something was telling him that he could not hide forever. It started with a small piece of paper. He found it on a bench at the bus stop one evening after work. Someone had left behind a newspaper. He almost walked past it. But something made him stop. Something made him pick it up. And when he turned to the arts section, he saw it. An announcement that made his heart stop. The City Symphony Orchestra was holding open auditions. They were looking for new talent. Anyone could apply, trained or untrained, young or old. All you needed was the courage to show up and play. He read those words at least 10 times. His hands were shaking. This was it. This was the chance he had been waiting for his entire life. The City Symphony was one of the most respected orchestras in the country. They had produced some of the finest musicians in the world. People who performed on the biggest stages. People who recorded albums that sold millions of copies. People whose names were remembered long after they were gone. For a moment, he let himself dream. He imagined himself standing on that stage. He imagined the lights, the audience, the sound of his violin, filling a grand hall. He imagined his mother sitting in the front row with tears of pride in her eyes. He imagined his father looking down from somewhere above, smiling. But then the doubt crept in. Who was he to think he could audition for something like this? He had no training, no credentials, no fancy degree from a music school. He was just a warehouse worker from a small town that nobody cared about. What would those judges think when they saw him walk in? They would probably laugh. They would probably tell him to leave before he wasted their time. He almost threw the newspaper away. He almost let the fear win. But that night, when he picked up his violin and started to play, something felt different. The music that came out was not just sound, it was a question. It was asking him if he was really going to let this chance pass him by. It was asking him if he was going to spend the rest of his life wondering what could have been. He made his decision before the last note faded. He was going to audition, no matter what happened. No matter how scared he was going to try. The audition was in 3 weeks. The city was 4 hours away by bus. The ticket would cost him almost half of his weekly paycheck. But he did not care. He started saving every penny he could. He skipped lunches. He walked instead of taking the bus to work. He picked up extra shifts even though his body was already exhausted. His mother noticed that something was different. She asked him what was going on. He did not want to tell her at first. He was afraid she would try to talk him out of it. But she kept asking, and finally, one night, he told her everything. She sat quietly for a long time after he finished. He could not read the expression on her face. He thought she was going to tell him it was a bad idea. He thought she was going to remind him of all the reasons why it would never work. But instead, she stood up and walked to her bedroom. She came back a few minutes later with a small envelope in her hand. Inside was some money. Not much, but enough to cover the bus ticket, and a little extra. She pressed it into his hands. Her eyes were wet. She told him that his father would have wanted him to go. She told him that no matter what happened, she was proud of him for having the courage to try. He hugged her for a long time that night, and when he finally let go, he promised her that he would give it everything he had. The day of the audition arrived faster than he expected. He woke up before dawn. He put on the nicest clothes he owned. They were not fancy, just a simple shirt and pants that his mother had ironed the night before. He picked up his father's violin and looked at it one last time. Then he walked out the door. The bus ride felt like it lasted forever. He watched the small towns pass by through the window. He watched the buildings get bigger as they got closer to the city. His heart was beating so fast he could feel it in his throat. When he finally arrived at the symphony hall, he could not believe his eyes. The building was enormous. Grand columns, tall windows. It looked like something from a movie. He had never seen anything so beautiful in his entire life. But as he walked through the front doors, he started to notice something. The other people waiting to audition did not look like him. They were dressed in expensive clothes. They carried violin cases that looked brand new. They spoke with confidence. They laughed with each other like they belonged there. And then there was him, a young man, in simple clothes, carrying an old violin in a worn-out case, standing alone in the corner, trying not to be noticed. When his turn finally came, he walked into the audition room on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. There were 3 judges sitting behind a long table. 2 men and 1 woman. They looked important, serious, the kind of people who had spent their entire lives around music. One of the judges looked at him and then looked at his violin case. He saw the scratches, the worn leather, the broken zipper that had been fixed with tape. The judge raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Another judge asked him where he had trained. He told them the truth. He had never trained anywhere. He was self-taught. He learned by watching videos and practicing alone in his room. The room went quiet. The judges exchanged looks. He saw one of them shake his head slightly. Another one sighed and checked his watch. They had already made up their minds. He could feel it, but he had come too far to turn back now. He opened his case. He pulled out his father's violin. He lifted it to his shoulder, and he began to play. He played a piece he had been practicing for years, a piece that meant everything to him. He poured his whole heart into every note. He forgot about the judges. He forgot about the grand room. He forgot about everything except the music. But 45 seconds into the piece, something happened that he would never forget. One of the judges raised his hand, the universal sign to stop. The young man froze. His bow hung in the air. The last note died in the silence. The judge who had raised his hand did not even look at him. He just said 5 words in a cold, flat voice. "Thank you. We have heard enough." That was it. No feedback. No encouragement. No explanation. Just a dismissal. Like he was nothing. Like his music was nothing. Like all those years of practice and sacrifice meant absolutely nothing. He walked out of that room in a daze. He did not remember picking up his case. He did not remember leaving the building. He just found himself standing on the street outside, staring at nothing, feeling like his whole world had just collapsed. The bus ride home was the longest 4 hours of his life. He sat in the back. He did not look out the window. He just held his violin case on his lap and stared at the floor. The dreams he had allowed himself to imagine felt foolish now, childish. He had been so stupid to think he ever had a chance. When he got home, his mother was waiting for him. She saw his face and knew immediately. She did not ask any questions. She just held him while he cried. That night, for the first time in almost 20 years, he did not play his violin. It sat in the corner of his room, untouched. And in the darkness, he whispered something he had never said before. Maybe they are right. Maybe I am just fooling myself. He had no idea that this was not the end of his story. It was only the beginning. 6 months passed after that terrible day. 6 months of silence, 6 months of emptiness. The violin stayed in the corner of his room, gathering dust. He could not bring himself to touch it. Every time he looked at it, he felt the sting of that rejection all over again. The cold voice of that judge echoing in his mind. Thank you. We have heard enough. He went back to his old routine. Wake up early. Go to the warehouse. Work until his body ached. Come home. Sleep. Repeat. Day after day. Week after week. He became like a machine, going through the motions but not really living. His mother watched him with worried eyes. She tried to talk to him about it. She tried to encourage him to play again. But he always changed the subject. He told her he was fine. He told her he had moved on, but they both knew it was a lie. The truth was, a part of him had died in that audition room. The part that believed in dreams. The part that thought maybe, just maybe, someone like him could make it. That part was gone now. Buried under the weight of reality. But life has a strange way of giving us second chances when we least expect them. And his second chance came in the form of a poster on a coffee shop wall. It was a Sunday afternoon. His one day off from work. He had stopped at a small coffee shop near his home to get something warm to drink, and there, taped to the wall next to the counter, was a poster that made him freeze. A world-famous violinist was coming to the city. She was one of the greatest musicians alive. He had watched her performances online hundreds of times. She played with a passion and emotion that he had never seen in anyone else. She was not just a musician, she was a storyteller. Every note she played carried a feeling, a memory, a piece of her soul. But that was not what caught his attention. At the bottom of the poster, in small letters, there was an announcement. After her concert, she would be hosting a rare open session for aspiring musicians, a chance for young artists to perform in front of her and receive her feedback. His heart started beating faster. His hands felt cold. He read those words again and again, making sure he was not imagining them. An open session. A chance to play. In front of her. For a moment, hope flickered inside him. But just as quickly, fear stomped it out. What was the point? He had already tried once. He had already been humiliated. Why would this time be any different? He was still the same untrained warehouse worker with an old violin and a broken dream. He walked out of the coffee shop without buying anything. He told himself to forget about it. He told himself it was not meant for people like him. He told himself that chapter of his life was closed. But the universe was not done with him yet. That night, he had a dream. He dreamed of his father. It was the first time in years. In the dream, his father was sitting in a chair by a window, holding the old violin. He did not say anything. He just looked at his son with gentle eyes and smiled. Then he held out the violin, as if offering it to him. He woke up with tears on his face. He lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling. And then, without really thinking about it, he got up and walked to the corner of his room. He picked up the violin for the first time in 6 months. He wiped the dust off with his sleeve. And he played. The sound that came out was rough at first. His fingers had forgotten their positions. His arm was stiff. But slowly, note by note, it started coming back. The music, the feeling, the connection to something bigger than himself. He played until the sun came up. And by the time he put the violin down, he had made a decision. He was going to that open session. Not because he thought he would succeed, not because he believed anything would change, but because he owed it to his father. He owed it to that little boy who made a promise so many years ago. He owed it to himself, to try one more time. The night of the concert arrived. He could not afford a ticket to the actual performance. But that did not matter. He only cared about the open session afterward. He put on his best clothes. He grabbed his violin. And he made the journey to the city once again. When he arrived at the concert hall, his stomach dropped. The place was packed. And not with ordinary people. With music students from the best schools. With young prodigies who had been training since they were children. With polished performers who looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. They all carried expensive instruments in beautiful cases. They all spoke with confidence about their teachers and their training and their achievements. They all belonged here. And then there was him. Standing in the back of the room. Holding his father's old violin in its worn-out case. Feeling more out of place than he had ever felt in his life. The open session began. One by one, the young musicians took the stage. They played pieces that were technically perfect, flawless. The kind of playing that came from years of professional training. The famous violinist listened carefully to each one. She nodded. She gave feedback. She was kind but honest. He watched from the back, his heart sinking with every performance. These people were so good, so polished, so prepared. What was he even doing here? He was wasting his time. He should just leave before he embarrassed himself again. He was about to turn around and walk out when the host of the session stepped forward. He announced that time was running out. There would be room for only one more performer. He asked if anyone else wanted to play. Several hands went up, confident hands, eager hands. The host looked around the room, trying to decide who to pick, and then something happened that he could not explain. Something took over his body. Something pushed him forward. Before he knew what he was doing, he was walking toward the front of the room. His legs were shaking. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. But he kept walking. People turned to look at him. He saw their expressions change. Confusion. Curiosity. Some of them smirked. Some of them whispered to each other. Who is this guy? Where did he come from? Look at that old violin. He reached the front of the room and stopped. The host looked at him with raised eyebrows. The famous violinist looked at him too. Her expression was unreadable. For a moment, he could not speak. His throat was dry. His mind was blank. Every instinct in his body was screaming at him to turn around and run. But he did not run. He stayed, and then he spoke. His voice was shaking, but the words came out clear. I know I do not belong here. I am not trained. I did not go to music school. I work at a warehouse. I taught myself to play by watching videos on a broken phone. I have been rejected before. I have been told I am not good enough, and maybe they were right. But I have been playing this violin since I was 7 years old. It belonged to my father, and I made him a promise that I would never give up. So I am asking you, please, just give me one chance to play. That is all I am asking for. The room went completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. He could feel every single pair of eyes on him. Some filled with pity. Some filled with doubt. Some filled with something that almost looked like respect. The famous violinist studied him for a long moment. Her eyes moved from his face to his old violin and back again. The silence stretched on. It felt like an eternity. And then, slowly, she nodded. She gestured to the stage. Play, she said. And in that moment, everything he had been through, every rejection, every tear, every sleepless night, it all came down to this. One chance. That was all he had ever wanted. Now he had it. He walked toward the stage on legs that did not feel like his own. Every step felt heavy. Every breath felt tight. The room was silent. He could feel the weight of every single pair of eyes pressing down on him, judging him, doubting him, waiting for him to fail. He stepped onto the small platform at the front of the room. The lights were brighter up here, hotter. He could see the faces in the audience more clearly now. Some looked curious. Some looked bored. A few in the back were already whispering to each other. probably wondering why they were wasting their time on someone like him. He recognized one face in the crowd. His heart nearly stopped. It was one of the judges from his audition 6 months ago. The same man who had raised his hand after 45 seconds. The same man who had told him they had heard enough. He was sitting in the third row, arms crossed, watching with an expression that said he already knew how this was going to end. For a moment, panic flooded through him. His hands started to tremble. His mind went blank. What was he doing here? He did not belong on this stage. He was going to humiliate himself all over again. Everyone was going to laugh. Everyone was going to confirm what he already feared deep down. That he was nothing. That he would always be nothing. But then something strange happened. In the middle of all that fear, he heard a voice. It was not a voice from the room. It was a voice from somewhere deeper. Somewhere inside him. And it sounded like his father. "Play for me," the voice said. "Forget about them. Just play for me." He closed his eyes. He took a deep breath. And he let everything else fall away. The doubters. The whispers. The bright lights. The fear. All of it disappeared. Until there was nothing left but him and his violin. Him and his father. Him and the music that had kept him alive all these years. He lifted the violin to his shoulder. The wood felt warm against his chin. Familiar. Like an old friend welcoming him home. He raised the bow. His hand was still shaking slightly, but it did not matter anymore. He began to play. The first note cut through the silence like a knife. It was not a perfect note. It was not a polished note. It was something else entirely. It was raw. It was real. It carried the weight of every struggle he had ever faced. Every tear he had ever cried. Every night he had spent alone in his tiny room, practicing until his fingers bled. And then came the second note. And the third. And the fourth. And suddenly, he was not just playing music anymore. He was telling a story. His story. The story of a little boy who lost his father too soon. The story of a young man who taught himself to play with nothing but determination and love. The story of someone who had been knocked down again and again but refused to stay down. The melody flowed out of him like water from a broken dam. He was not thinking about technique. He was not thinking about impressing anyone. He was just feeling. Every emotion he had buried deep inside was now pouring out through the strings of that old violin. The room changed. He could feel it even with his eyes closed. The energy shifted. The whispers stopped. The rustling stopped. Even the breathing seemed to stop. There was nothing but the music. Nothing but his melody filling every corner of that grand hall. He played the piece he had composed himself. A piece he had never played for anyone before. A piece that did not have a name. He had written it during the darkest time of his life. After his father died. After the loneliness became too much to bear. It was the only way he knew how to express what words could never capture. The melody started soft and sad. Like a child crying in the dark. Then it grew. It swelled. It became something bigger. Something that spoke of hope. Of resilience. Of the stubborn refusal to give up even when the whole world tells you to quit. There was a moment in the middle of the piece where the music dropped to almost nothing. Just a single, trembling note hanging in the air. He let it linger. He let it breathe, and in that silence, he thought of his mother, working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. Never complaining. Never giving up. He thought of her sitting at home right now. Probably praying for him, believing in him even when he did not believe in himself. The note swelled again. The melody rose. It climbed higher and higher until it felt like it might break through the ceiling and reach the sky itself. This was the part of the piece that always made him cry when he played it alone. It was the part that represented his father. Watching over him. Proud of him. Telling him that everything was going to be okay. Tears were streaming down his face now. He did not try to stop them. He did not care who saw. This was not a performance anymore. This was a prayer. This was a conversation with someone he had lost but never stopped loving. The final notes approached. He could feel them building inside him. He played them with everything he had left. Every ounce of strength. Every drop of love. Every fragment of his broken and beautiful heart. And then it was over. The last note faded into the air. He lowered his bow. He opened his eyes. The room was completely silent. For a terrible moment, he thought he had failed again. He thought the silence meant they were not impressed. He thought they were just waiting for him to leave, so they could move on with their lives. But then he looked at the faces in front of him, and what he saw made his breath catch in his throat. A young woman in the front row had tears running down her cheeks. She was not even trying to wipe them away. Next to her, a man who had looked bored before was now staring at him with his mouth slightly open. Across the room, 2 music students were holding hands, their eyes red and wet, and the judge. The one who had rejected him 6 months ago. He was no longer sitting with his arms crossed. He was leaning forward in his chair. His head was bowed. He could not look up. It almost seemed like he was ashamed. The famous violinist rose from her seat. She did not say anything at first. She just stood there, one hand pressed against her chest, looking at him like she was seeing something she had not seen in a very long time. And then she started to clap. It was slow at first, just her hands coming together in the silent room. But then someone else joined in. And another. And another. Until the entire room was filled with applause. Not polite applause, not the kind you give to be nice. This was something else. This was thunder. This was a wave crashing against the shore. This was every single person in that room telling him the same thing. We hear you. We see you. You belong here. People started standing up. One by one. Row by row. Until every single person in that room was on their feet. Clapping. Crying. Some of them cheering. He stood on that stage, clutching his father's violin. Tears still streaming down his face. He could not move. He could not speak. He could barely breathe. He had waited his whole life for this moment. He had dreamed of it, prayed for it, almost given up on it. And now it was here. And it was more beautiful than anything he had ever imagined. The famous violinist walked toward the stage. She climbed the steps and stood in front of him. The applause continued behind her, but she did not seem to notice. She was looking only at him. She reached out and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. Her eyes were glistening. When she spoke, her voice was soft. But in the stillness between the claps, he heard every word. That, she said, was the most beautiful thing I have heard in years. He could not respond. He just nodded. His heart was too full for words. He had asked for one chance. Just one chance to be heard. And finally, the world had listened. The applause eventually faded. The crowd slowly settled back into their seats, but the energy in that room had changed forever. Something had shifted. Something that could never be undone. And at the center of it all stood a young man who still could not believe what had just happened. The famous violinist did not leave his side. She stood next to him on that small stage, studying him with eyes that seemed to look straight into his soul. When the room finally grew quiet again, she turned to face the audience. She told them that in all her years of performing and teaching, she had heard thousands of musicians. Some were technically brilliant, some were gifted beyond measure. But very few had ever made her feel something real. Very few had ever moved her to tears. And tonight, she said, this young man had done exactly that. She turned back to him. She asked him a question that he would remember for the rest of his life. Where did you learn to play like that? He swallowed hard. His voice was barely above a whisper when he answered, nowhere. I just felt it. She nodded slowly. Like she understood something that went beyond words. Like she recognized a kindred spirit. Someone who did not just play music, but lived it. Breathed it. Bled it. After the session ended, she asked him to stay behind. The other musicians filed out of the room, many of them glancing back at him with expressions he had never seen directed at him before. Respect, admiration. Some of them even nodded at him as they passed. The same people who had smirked at his old violin just an hour ago now looked at him differently. He sat with the famous violinist in a small room backstage. She asked him about his life. He told her everything. The small town, the warehouse job, his father's death, the old violin, the years of teaching himself, the rejection, the nights of doubt, the moment he almost gave up forever. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that changed the entire direction of his life. She told him about a music academy in Europe, one of the finest in the world. She said they had a special scholarship for exceptional talent. It did not matter if you had formal training. It did not matter where you came from. What mattered was the ability to move people with your music. And he, she said, had that ability in abundance. She told him she wanted to personally recommend him for that scholarship. She believed in him. She believed he had something rare and precious. Something that could not be taught. Something that was simply born inside certain people and needed only the right opportunity to shine. He did not know what to say. He sat there in stunned silence, trying to process what he was hearing. This could not be real. Things like this did not happen to people like him, people from small towns with nothing to their name, people who had been told their whole lives that they would never amount to anything. But it was real, and it was happening. The next few months moved fast, faster than he could have ever imagined. The famous violinist kept her word. She wrote a personal letter of recommendation. She made phone calls. She opened doors that he never even knew existed. Something else happened too. Someone in the audience that night had recorded his performance on their phone. They posted it online. And within days, it spread like wildfire. Millions of people watched that video. Millions of people saw a young man in simple clothes, holding an old violin, pouring his heart out on a stage where he did not belong. The comments flooded in from all over the world. People shared their own stories of struggle and rejection. People said his music made them cry. People said he gave them hope. News outlets picked up the story. The warehouse worker who silenced a room full of experts. The self-taught violinist who moved a legend to tears. His face was suddenly everywhere. Interviews, articles, television appearances. The world could not get enough of him, but through all of it, he stayed the same. He did not let the attention change who he was. He remembered where he came from. He remembered the people who had believed in him when no one else did. The first thing he did with the money from his new opportunities was pay off his mother's debts. He bought her a small house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing fancy. But it had a garden where she could grow flowers, and a kitchen where she could cook without worrying about the electricity being shut off. The day she walked through the front door of that house, she cried for an hour. He held her the same way she had held him all those years when he had nothing. He went to Europe. He studied at the academy. He learned things he never knew existed. Techniques, theory, history. But the teachers there told him something interesting. They said his raw talent was something they could not teach. They could only help him refine it. The fire inside him, they said, was already burning brighter than most musicians would ever achieve. He performed on stages he had only dreamed of. Concert halls filled with thousands of people. Audiences who paid hundreds of dollars just to hear him play. Critics who once would have ignored him now wrote glowing reviews. They called him a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation talent, a voice for the voiceless. But fame and success were never what he truly wanted. What he wanted was something simpler, something more meaningful. Every year, without fail, he returned to his small hometown. The same town that most people had never heard of. The same town that people usually left and never came back to. But he came back, every single year. He started a free music program for children who reminded him of himself. Kids with big dreams and empty pockets. Kids who had no money for lessons or instruments. Kids who had been told by the world that people like them do not become musicians. He taught them himself. He sat with them in a small community center and showed them how to hold a violin, how to read notes, how to feel the music instead of just playing it. He told them his story. He showed them his father's old violin, still scratched and worn, still the most valuable thing he owned. Some of those kids went on to become musicians themselves. Some of them won scholarships. Some of them performed on stages of their own. And every time one of them succeeded, he felt like his father was smiling somewhere. Years passed. His name became known around the world. But he never forgot the boy he used to be. The boy who practiced alone in a tiny room. The boy who was laughed at and rejected. The boy who made a promise to his father and refused to break it. In one of his final interviews, a journalist asked him a question that many people had wondered about. What kept you going? After all the rejection, after all the doubt, what made you keep trying when everyone told you to stop? He smiled softly. He thought about his mother, his father, the old violin, the cold audition room, the famous violinist who gave him a chance, the children he now taught every year, and then he gave an answer that would be remembered long after he was gone. I was not playing for them, he said. I was never playing for them. I was playing for a little boy who made a promise to his father. A promise that he would never give up. A promise that he would keep playing no matter what. That little boy deserved to be heard, and I was not going to let him down. The journalist nodded. The camera captured a single tear rolling down the musician's cheek. Some people are born with everything, he continued. And some people are born with nothing but a dream. I was one of those people. And if my story can teach anyone anything, I hope it is this. Your circumstances do not define you. Your failures do not define you. The only thing that defines you is whether you get back up after you fall. He paused. He looked directly into the camera, and he spoke his final words. So get back up, and never stop playing your music. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to hear it. And that is how a warehouse worker from a forgotten town became one of the greatest musicians the world had ever known. Not because of luck, not because of connections, but because he believed in himself when no one else did, and because he never broke his promise,